Here's your peppermint latte, sir.
Thank you.
Anything else I can get for you?
I'll take a peppermint latte.
I feel like you've said that before.
I feel like I have too, and yet now I'm in the mood for an eggplant macchiato.
This season of the Bug Hunters Cafe is made possible by Softerific, Mousepaw Media, and...
I thought I usually said that.
You do?
Words, they're all we have to go on.
Rosencrantz?
Guildenstern. Hey, Boyan, what's happening?
Nothing.
Really?
Absolutely nothing.
Cafe looks busy, though.
It's busy, but nothing is happening. Which now that you mention is weird, because lots was happening a few minutes ago, and I can't remember any of it.
Oh, dear.
What do you mean, oh dear?
Well, see, I was having breakfast with a friend in 1870, and I took a detour on the way back to the 24th century, and I think when I landed here, I made a plot hole.
A pothole?
No, not a pothole, a plot hole, like a hole in the plot.
So that's why nothing is happening.
Well, worse, it's disrupted continuity, so anything can happen.
So if I wanted to make ice cream spontaneously appear, I could?
I wouldn't try for it. Without continuity, you could get anything, like spiders.
Plot holes are terrible.
I'll have to ponder how to fix it. Oh, hi, Alex.
Hey, Jason, what's happening? Good to see you.
Where did you come from?
Like I said, no continuity. But yeah, meet Alex Booker, content lead at Scrimba and host of the Scrimba podcast.
Oh, he's way better than spiders.
Boyan, it's a pleasure to meet you.
Pleasure to meet you as well.
Hi, so you just spontaneously appeared. That was surprising. Have a seat.
You know, I was just on a run and I just turned the corner and I ended up here. I don't know what happened.
Continuity's broken. Can I get you anything to drink? The coffee's on Softerific and Mousepaw Media. They're sponsoring the talks this year.
Oh, brilliant. I'm going to take Black Americano, if that's okay, Jason.
All right, sounds good. And what would you like, Boyan?
The usual, triple espresso, black, no sugar.
I know that's your usual, but I feel like it shouldn't be your usual.
Nah, I'm pretty sure it is.
Okay. Huh. Continuity thing. I will be right back with that.
So, Alex, while Jason is away, I want to impress him. So, can you tell me the most impressive thing about coding ever?
About coding?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Probably the ability to change the world, man. Like, you know, JavaScript has made its way into space lately with SpaceX and rockets, and everybody uses tech, right?
So you're saying front-end developers can control rockets in space?
Unfortunately, that there is an element of truth to that, yes. Hopefully there's no off-by-one errors.
You know, I have 3 siblings and they're all front-end developers. Now I'm even more scared of them.
JavaScript is a powerful thing, man. With great power comes great responsibility.
Doubly so with case of JavaScript.
Too right.
So tell me, how did you get into coding? And was it in the time of Internet Explorer 6 or later?
No, quite a bit later, probably. The long and short of it is that I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do when I was in school, but I was always dabbling with computers. Somewhere along the way, I stumbled into coding and, you know, a friend wanted me to edit some code and he sent me a Java project and I couldn't believe, you know, you just had to open the file in Notepad. I thought maybe you'd need this really complex program. And that just showed me firstly how accessible coding is. And then I went on YouTube and found some great coding tutorials and taught myself how to code. And that showed me how accessible coding education is. And it really changed my life. And so a lot of what I do now is trying to kind of extend that to new developers and teach them the things that I wish I knew when I was getting started.
And what would you say is the biggest mistake usually new developers make?
It's an interesting one because when you're learning to code, you think it's all about the code, which is very natural and it seems kind of obvious. But, it takes a lot of mental fortitude as well, because you have to show up every day for a long time. And I think for most new developers, they're perfectly capable of learning to code, like it's 100% within them, but their expectations don't quite match reality. And they think they're going to learn to code in a matter of weeks, maybe a few months. And when things get more difficult and it starts to slog, at that point, they start to doubt themselves and fall off the rails a little bit. So it's funny because the most challenging thing is normally, staying in it for the long term. The only sure way to fail something is to quit, right? So if you can just be consistent over a long period of time, I think you'll be in a good place.
Here are your orders, gentlemen. And I caught the last part of that, Alex, and I have to agree. I've been training interns for almost a decade now, and almost all of them drop out at the halfway point, because the halfway point of this year-long internship program is when they're past the novelty phase, past the wide-eyed intern clasping their briefcase, and they are not yet at the level of, I know what I'm doing comfortably and I can now, strike out on my own a little bit more. They're kind of in that odd space where they know what they're doing in their own little domain, but they're having it's that slog. There's a little bit more of that slog. And how many interns have had? About half of the ones through the program will end up going, I was expecting this to be a lot more fun. Like, well,
Wow.
Yes, it will get more fun, but hopefully there's a passion there to sustain an interest, because it's not always going to be fun. There's going to be sometimes that you want to let Windows meet its namesake. And
I can't believe half. That's so many. But at the same time, I completely understand it. I think a lot of the times, especially in this climate, although that's changing actually a little bit, people see the allure of working in tech companies and they're really coming at it from a career perspective, and they see all the benefits and advantages of working in tech. But maybe their intrinsic motivation isn't quite where it needs to be. If you're doing something for the prestige or the salary or whatever people think, that's really extrinsic motivation. And while that burns really bloody hot for a while, it does burn out about the halfway point. And so I think finding that intrinsic motivation, which I think for a lot of programmers comes down to the satisfaction of problem solving and watching something evolve, building it up piece by piece, getting to commit to a skill which you can never really truly master. If you love learning and you get satisfaction out of learning, I think you're going to get a great kick out of programming. But unfortunately, and it's through no one's fault really, sometimes you just have to try something for a bit and, learn what you don't know. And you climb a hill, you can't see across the hill until you get to the top, right? And maybe the halfway point is that apex. And then you're like, I've come this far. I don't think I want to go further. I have complete respect for anybody with the self-awareness to do that. But at the same time, half, that's such a big number. What do you make of that?
well, I mean, there's a few different reasons, but basically I've isolated like 5 reasons why people wind up dropping out. Kind of the 3 that you can do something about, that are like obstacles to overcome, are like, some just don't read. And so they get frustrated at not having the information they need, but the information was there. They didn't slow down and pay attention to the information in front of them, or they didn't pay attention to what the code was saying or the error message was saying. And a ongoing habit of that really burns you out. There's the ones who don't ask questions, and so they're stuck and they wind up tilting, to use the video game term. And then they just don't. And so they hammer at it for 2 weeks, and then they come to you and go, oh, I hate this problem. Why can't I get this to compile? And you look at it and go, you missed a semicolon. I wish you'd asked me 2 weeks ago. Here, let me explain how I knew to look for the semicolon. And you can help them learn that, but they don't ask the questions because they feel like they have to be the smartest person. And it's weird because it doesn't matter how many times you say, hey, you know what? Make mistakes. We all make mistakes. Let me tell you about some of mine. They're like, well, no, I have to be different. I have to perform. And it's unfortunate. The third being poor time management, just like not setting aside some prime brain time to work on this. So if it's your nights and weekends after you're already burned out from school and working at Chick-fil-A and whatever, then it's going to be hard because this is mentally difficult. Those are 3 you can do something about, but then the other 2 are, well, I guess the 4th you can do something about. The novelty wears off, but arguably, if the novelty wears off and it's no longer interesting, then, it's maybe another career field would be better because the novelty is going to wear off. But some of that's the personality of always looking for novelty too. And like everything's going to lose its novelty. But then I think the one reason for leaving the program, or the one reason for quitting programming, that I support and I even celebrate with the interns who leave for this reason is, I've been doing this a while and I realized something. This just is not something I enjoy, but I like this other thing over here and I really enjoy this. And I want to, I had one guy go, I think I'd rather be a data analyst. I really enjoy working with data. Never mind the code. I'm not a fan of the code. I want to analyze the data and spot trends in the data. If there's a little code in there, that's great, but I want to do the data. Good. Do that.
But that's the cool thing about the novelty point you made, which is that you can normally remix coding and keep it interesting for yourself, whether it's the platform, the language, even the domain, right? So even the speciality, whether that's data science using Python and R, or front-end development. More of what you learn in terms of problem solving and syntax parlay, you can transfer them just as easily, and nothing's ever really lost. But I did especially like your point about time management as well, because I see that a lot myself in my experience speaking with new developers on the Scrimba podcast and Scrimba Discord and stuff. I think a lot of people, they do it part-time and they're frustrated because on the surface, they're dedicating 2 to 3 hours a day, which in my view is a healthy chunk. If you do that consistently for many months, I think you'll go a long way. But your brain's a bit tired at that point if you've been doing 2 jobs. And, are you doing those 2 to 3 hours in a chunk, or are you fragmenting them throughout the day? Because as I think you'll both agree, and all 3 of your siblings, Boyan, who do front-end development, with coding, you often get in the zone, and a lot of it is just sticking at it. Once you get in the zone, just doing everything you can to stay there. And this really comes back to what I said, when it comes to coding, so much of it is like mentality and just understanding that it's okay to ask a question. You're never going to look stupid. You have to dedicate some time to it, like you say, Jason. I think this is fascinating.
You mentioned about getting into zone, and I discovered that every time I get into zone, I try to get out of it, because you're writing super fast code, you're ignoring a bunch of stuff, and you do get to a solution fairly quickly. But the next day you have no idea how you got there, because usually code is much lower quality. You don't have tests, variables are not named correctly. I mean, at the moment it made quite a lot of sense, but the day after,
Who wrote this?
You get a pretty huge hangover from that.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Like a coding brain fogged hangover, looking at the code you wrote frantically the night before. Wow, that's such an interesting experience. I think for me, what I tend to do is get in the zone, and then when I feel myself getting tired, I go back to the tasks that are just quite easy to do. And for me, refactoring is quite easy because it's I find it quite playful, actually, just thinking through how to name things. For some reason, I rarely find myself blocked on these things. And that to me is the difference between, cranking out a task and needing to be in the zone. Like if I'm going to find it difficult to stay focused and I have a creative problem or a new bug or something that I have to really get deep into, hold a lot of context in my head and solve, then being in the zone is perfect. And yeah, rest assured, I'll do some damage along the way on that particular commit. But that's the cool thing about coding, right? It's kind of scoped to a block of change in a commit or a pull request or something. And then you can hopefully review that and, maybe do that after you leave the zone. And if you still have enough context and you remember it well enough, maybe do it in the morning or something.
The strategy I want to adopt, because I have to say, Boyan, that's an interesting observation. I can vouch for that, but I certainly never thought of it that way. That when you're in the zone, your solutions get exponentially more brilliant, but your actual implementation gets quite a bit weirder. And I think that answers so much to me about my own code. But one of the ways I was just thinking that I work around this is I've always had to just accept that my brain works weird. I go through thousands of iterations in one pass, in one sitting. And I advocate for test driven development. I love test driven development. I cannot do it because as soon as I write the test, any test, that test is invalid within 5 minutes of writing it, guaranteed, because I will re-architecture everything about the solution 100 times in that sitting. So what I wound up doing is kind of giving myself that permission to just cut a branch and just go nuts and architecture and change and tweak and modify and, do my whole process. And then once I was decently happy and manually tested what I liked, and maybe this has even been over a couple of days, like, because I'm still, getting pieces of the architecture worked out. Once I'm happy with it, off of my own branch, I will do an interactive rebase. I love this about Git. I learned this from a colleague of mine. Thomas taught me about this, and basically, so I will do a soft reset to the beginning of that branch, and then I will do Git interactive pick. I'm trying to remember what that command is off the top of my head. I think it's like Git add -p or something like that, and that will let me actually select and then build up commits based on what it is I'm trying to do in each step. So I'll pull out layers, and then I'll take each layer, stash the rest, write the test for that layer, and then I'll keep repeating that process. And so that will usually take me another day. I might have been working on it for 3 days, and that might take me another day to do all of that. But then by the time I've got the PR finished, you have this really clean commit history. And it looks like I sat down and plotted all this out. And so I've got 30 really beautiful, clean, tested, documented commits. Yes, I rewrote history to do it, but the end result is that the repository is getting something that's much cleaner. And if in the middle of that I discover like a typo or some stupid thing that I just overlooked, I will go back and I will do a Git rebase interactive, and I will fix that at its source. And I had one guy tell me, well, don't do that, you're rewriting history. I'm like, I would rather rewrite history in my own PR than put a bunch of confetti commits in the repository, because fix typo, fix typo, fix typo, fix typo, fix typo helps no one. So I just go back and I rebase.
So if I understand this correctly, history is not written by winners, but by test-driven development.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. History is not fixed. It is a big ball of wibbly wobbly, timey-wimey stuff.
I like that you identified, Jason, that, you think about things a little bit differently, and test-driven development just doesn't work for the way you work and the way you think necessarily. But then a lot of purists would say, oh, you have to do it this way. Everything else is wrong. What would you say to that?
I would say that anytime we say, well, yeah, it has to be my way, everything else is wrong, that's just insecurity talking. Because the reality is, the purists of test-driven development, or the purists of Scrum, or the purists of Solid, or whatever, are forgetting that people have been writing solid, reliable, effective code, solid as in trustworthy, reliable, effective code, long before they were ever coding, and will continue to write it long after they're gone. And people have ideas that help in particular domains, they help in particular situations, but just because this is the way that this team solves this problem that works really well for them does not mean you can just pick it up, copy it, clone it to another team, and it solves all their problems. Because another team is different people with a different project.
Yeah, and in my experience, not usually this works for one team, but I read on internet that this works for a team. Now we're all going to do agile and test-driven development without taking into context what are we doing, or does it make sense. I mean, agile works perfectly well for some situations, but in other situations I find it far more liberating to work without agile, with meetings and discussing stuff.
What is the important thing to align to in those situations? Like, because what doesn't matter is like using agile. Like, that's not a goal in and of itself. Like, what in your view, like, is the goal when you're writing software?
For me, it's alignment between business owners and developers. What's important for them? They really do not care if we write code in Python, JavaScript, or anything else. They want product delivered, and finding the optimal way that gets them features that they want, and on the other hand, bothers developer the least. So we don't have to spend whole day doing retrospections. But since this, for example, maintenance projects, we can actually just implement feature and sync up once a day or something like that. Simple.
Hmm.
Well, and I would argue that that is agile. The whole point of agile is, is to focusing on the people rather than the process. And so agile itself is just the concept of let's actually figure out what works best for this team. Unfortunately, it's just kind of had all of this crud piled on it by different corporations. Said, well, okay, what we're really doing is a form of Scrum band, but it's zombified and it's really waterfall under the hood and whatever. But
This is agile, and it's so brilliant. We're going to offer certifications in our particular flavor, and you should use it at your company.
and then people hear that and they think, ugh, this is agile. I'd rather do waterfall. And the reality is they are doing waterfall.
I like what you said that, it's very situational. And like when you look at agile and what it is, it's really just a Bible of principles. And you can and there are some very objectively good principles in agile and philosophies that you can apply to your projects judiciously. I think the idea of like a scrum master and these certificates and stuff and product owners who are also scrum masters and this kind of thing in small teams, they'll often be the same person. I think it's totally wrong because you're trying to make it a box ticking exercise, like trying to fit a perfect square into a perfect square hole. But when people and projects are complicated, it's never going to be that way. I think what really makes software projects successful and how project managers are successful is just about, bridging the gap between the developers and the business requirements and facilitating and communication. And if to be a better communicator, you're going to fall back on some agile print. I mean, it's great to have a Kanban board, for example, and follow ideas like things should move from left to right and having a daily stand-up can definitely solve a real problem, like identifying blockers and making sure that anybody gets unblocked so they can make progress that day. But when it just becomes a ritual for the sake of it and it almost becomes a micromanagement activity, or the team is saying, hey, I'm getting no value from this stand-up, we've done it for weeks, it's going on too long, we're not getting any value from it. I think at that point, like, software leaders have to take a look at the climate and what's happening and sort of adapt and improvise and bring good communication to that team and clarity about what's trying to be done. Sort of fitting round peg into a square hole, or a square peg into a round hole, it just doesn't really work, does it?
Or a dodecahedron into a square hole.
Well, peak agile experience for me was when I was on a daily stand-up with 70 people.
70.
Yeah, it was for a huge company, which sadly NDA prevents me from saying, but they had a new project, basically proof of concept that they wanted to build really fast. So they put developers on it, and we had daily meetings with 70 people. So my hour had 4 to 6 hours of daily meetings.
That's outrageous. Is that an example of the mythical man month, do you think?
I'm not sure. I think they were not looking at it as efficient as we put more developers, it's going to be finished, but we're going to take this chunk of our company, it's going to be more like a startup and it's going to work more efficient. And we're going to apply these ideas without actually thinking about that.
Well, yeah, I mean, how much of this is cargo cult management at the end of the day? We're imitating processes without really understanding the processes that we're imitating or why those processes matter.
Is that what cargo? What did you say? Cargo cult management. What does that mean?
Yeah. Well, cargo cult. I picked up the term originally from Python cargo cult programming. The idea of people copying and pasting their setup.py file or what have you.
Is cargo like a build tool or something in Python? Is that?
No. So this originally comes from kind of an anthropological hiccup during World War II, when we were engaged in warfare with Japan in the South Pacific. Allied forces had to use a lot of those Pacific islands as temporary bases of operation, landing strips, what have you. Well, those were occupied already. There's people living there. And for many of those people, they had never had contact with Western civilization. They had not seen some of this technology. They've been living the same way for thousands and thousands of years. So this is the first time seeing things like radios and airplanes and modern medicine. And this was just, you can imagine the rush here. And because military rations are infamously bad, a lot of times the soldiers would trade some of their rations and some of their stuff, some of their medicine for local produce because it was a really good way of getting fresh food. Well, once we won the war and we pulled out of all those temporary military bases, the people who, again, had not had any contact with Western civilization up to that point were wanting a lot of these resources again, but they didn't really understand where these people had come from. And so they wanted to summon back the gods and their, great silver birds. And so they started building up. And when the anthropologists got there, like about, I think it was like 10 years after the war, they discovered that people were building straw airplanes, straw, huts that looked like radio control towers. They were making headphones with microphones out of coconut shells. They were having drill parades. They understood none of what they were doing. But what they were doing was imitating what they had seen the troops do in hopes that something was going to cause these great silver birds carrying gifts from the heavens back to the island. And they had actually built up an entire religion around U.S. Air Force and Army and Navy equipment. And they had no idea what it actually was.
That's an amazing story.
So cargo cults, and there's some of them still believe this too. There's actually still examples of cargo cults in the South Pacific. A lot of them understand now what it is, but some of them don't. And so cargo cult is anytime we're imitating, we humans just tend to do this. We're imitating patterns in hopes of getting the same outcome without actually understanding the patterns.
Oh my God. That's kind of like an earth-shattering perspective because, how often are we looking at successful people and whether it's intentional or not, like imitating what they're doing to some extent, maybe not understanding what's going on under the surface.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and actually there was an animal behaviorist that pointed out that humans and primates in general learn by and away entirely by imitation. Many other animals don't learn by imitation. They learn by direct training. But primates tend to learn by imitation, and that's both one of our greatest advantages and one of our greatest disadvantages, because we imitate without knowing what we're doing. Look at children.
Well, yeah, you oftentimes only see the surface anyway. Like if you, watch a sports game, for example, you might pick up a new technique or something or a tactic or whatever, but you might not really understand what went into that happening, Like you're just maybe imitating it, but getting completely different results. And I think that could apply doubly so to development. I like that about code. Like with code, you can always get to the source of truth. Like there's always an objectively correct answer. But I think when it comes to like people and project management and stuff, I see exactly where you're coming from.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, I agree with you. Code can be objectively true, although it's usually missing context when it's sitting on Stack Overflow.
Fair point.
What have you? I actually had a guy on IRC go, okay, so how do I fix the indentation in Python when I copy and paste from Stack Overflow? I said, well, first of all, here's the command in Visual Studio Code that fixes that. But let this be the last day of your life, you copy and paste from Stack Overflow. It's like, why? Because you're bringing bugs, assumptions, typos, misunderstandings, names that only make sense in the context of the original code. If you retype it, you're training yourself on the patterns, and you're also modifying those patterns to fit the situation you're in.
Stack Overflow is just a tool, though, isn't it? Like, I think I'm curious to hear if you're talking about like newer developers here, because I think as a new developer, copying and pasting code is like very alluring for so many reasons. But once you have a bit of not just experience, but once you understand the fundamentals of what you're doing, you're really just looking at an example, like with some contrived context. And normally that's enough to at least like, point you in the right direction. And then you have to put on your, programming hats and start thinking like a programmer within the context of your app to make it work.
Yeah. And I would argue that Stack Overflow is a great source for pieces of code for simpler projects, like stuff that junior developers are more likely to be working on. It can be really good, but, sure, use the code for Stack Overflow, but my thinking has always been type it out. Okay, so it's 30 lines. Go ahead and just type those 30 lines yourself.
And understand those lines as well, right?
Exactly. Yeah, so you're getting used to it, and because there's things that you start to see as you're typing and go, wait a minute, why am I using three equal signs there? That's weird. I have never used three equal signs before. I've always used two. Why are they using three? And then you look it up and go, oh. And if you copied and pasted, you might not have realized there were three equal signs there because it's such an insignificant detail to the eyes, but it's fundamentally different to the computer.
Yeah.
Yes, your financial projections are excellent, but have you budgeted enough for confetti?
Good morning, Annie. Coffee feels strangely boring today.
Jason said something about a plot hole. Continuity is broken, so expect the unexpected.
Is the unicorn doing the cafe visit unexpected?
I feel like it should be, and yet here we are.
What's the special today?
Eggplant macchiato, which I have a sneaking suspicion should not exist.
Oh, I have a question for both of you. What's your opinion on the new AI tools that write code for you, like Copilot and stuff like that?
I weep for my generation.
Jason has his hands in his head in his hands.
What's your thought on it, Alex?
I can't say I have much experience with it, to be honest. I'm kind of curious to hear your thoughts.
Well, aside from the fact that there's now a pending lawsuit because it's pulling code without regard to license and thereby violating the terms of the GPL or copyrighted code or other things along those lines. Mm-hmm. Aside from that, that's like copying and pasting from Stack Overflow on steroids. You are bringing in, again, typos, bugs, and context that you have absolutely no idea is there. And so if somebody, consider, for example, they trained it on the entirety of GitHub. So what happens when somebody writes a code and they put in let's just say they misspell a variable that they're creating in this context, and they have a crucial security bug that 5 years now is going to be a 0-day exploit. And they have an assumption about how the data is structured from elsewhere in the code that is implicit in this code. Mm-hmm. And you're typing along, and some of the code that is being automatically inserted is coming from this code that it was trained on. You've now brought in that typo. You've now brought in that 0-day exploit. You have now brought in that assumption about the data that you don't realize is being assumed and is maybe going to have some unexpected corner case that you did not expect. So I think the misunderstanding here is it's the idea that our goal is to write code. That's not why we're here. We're not here to write code. We're here to solve a problem. And code is a tool for solving the problem. If we're just here to write more code, this would be great. We're here to solve a problem. And because this is bypassing our brain and sticking itself right into the code to where we only need to glance over it. How many of us are really good PRs? None of us. Looks good to me. We don't see that little typo. And then we move on because we got so many other things bouncing around in our brain. We now have problems in our code that we didn't anticipate because we didn't write that code.
Yeah. I think you're absolutely spot on that people don't hire coders because a coder is just inputting instructions into the computer. Programming and problem solving is what really matters. And to that extent, so if you go back a few decades ago, coding and programming was like a separate job because inputting code into the computer was time consuming, error prone, and in air bubbles less than programming and actually coming up with the instructions and the plan essentially. But then programming languages bridged that gap and made us a lot more efficient at expressing those instructions and communicating to the computer. And look at the way development's going with things like NPM and the JavaScript and Node ecosystem. Oftentimes, if you've done something 10 times before, there's no point reinventing the wheel, first of all, because that's inefficient. Number two, they've probably done a more robust job than you because they have dedicated to the library. It might benefit from tests and things like that. And thirdly, should there be any mistake, and mistakes can always happen in software, they can, patch the module and you do an update and you get that fix. Hopefully not a major 0-day, but whatever it might be, you can fix that. And so I think GitHub Copilot and some of these code writing tools, I think are absolutely spot on in like helping you quickly express something that you've already done 10 times before. Like if you just need a particular utility function, or maybe there's a particular block of code you're writing, I think it can be a productivity tool. And, just because you use it doesn't, excuse you from being judicious and reviewing that code and being cautious of what you input into the program. And I take your point about typos and 0 days and that kind of thing. But, even without AI, we can do that, like we're very capable of introducing our own mistakes into software. And, I absolutely believe that you have to be judicious and review that code anyway.
Yeah. I think I might have been more a fan of it if it had required you to continue typing instead of being able to hit tab and getting in 150 lines of code.
That's a lot, yeah, because you're not reasonably going to sort of review that and understand it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's I think and don't reinvent the wheel is such an interesting phrase to me anyway. I tend to dislike the phrase because I get the context of, look, you're not going to write a better sorting algorithm. You're really not. Don't try to write a better sorting algorithm unless you've got some really fundamentally proven way of knocking the socks off the alternatives. You're not going to just sit down and come up with one. Or, your own string library in most cases. And saying this, I actually worked on a string library, but it was, it was fundamentally different than the one that was available. But then, on the other hand, I guess it also depends on, well, how much are you pulling in? Because one of my interns was recently working on creating an interactive shell. So needed to be able to pull up, history from commands and whatever. And this is in C++. And so he's trying to figure out how to get the arrow key to be able to just go through the history. And the thing he keeps hearing is, oh, just use end curses, just use end curses. And he's going, I don't want to use end curses. It's a huge dependency. I'm adding this. I don't need 99% of what's in end curses. I just need this one thing. Because I'm building something that's very fit to purpose. It's thin, it's small, it's focused. And so in that case, it actually made more sense to reinvent the wheel because he needed a smaller wheel. And, if you think of how many times we've actually reinvented the wheel, is we've reinvented it a lot, but you're not going to reinvent the wheel to replace the wheel that you just blew out of your car. You're going to go to Discount Tire or what have you. I am not a pet spokesman. But if you're building a new Mars rover, yeah, you're going to reinvent the wheel. Absolutely.
Fair point.
Jason, for some reason, this Express is not bringing me the joy it usually does.
Yeah, I keep feeling like you usually get something else. I can't put my finger on what it is, but continuity is helpful.
Triple espresso, Boyan. Do you want to bounce off the walls?
Not really, but I usually do. There's the bounciness in this espresso.
Something's just missing. So, Alex, you've been helping a lot of juniors over the last few years here with your Scrimba podcast and Scrimba in general. And what are some of the common mistakes that you see that juniors make?
At which stage? Like the learning stage or like the job applying stage?
Well, I guess either one, but sure, we'll start with learning.
It's mad, we've done, I think we just released our 88th episode. And of course, Jason, yourself, you've been a guest that, highly recommend anybody listening check out your and my interview on the Scrimba podcast if they have time. And the cool thing is 1 week I sort of speak with a newly hired developer who just got the job a few months ago at most. And then the week after I speak with someone with a lot of experience like yourself, Jason. And it's really cool to get to learn from both sides. And sometimes I'll be kind of, posing questions to more experienced folk that the juniors had in the previous episode. And it's a lot of fun. And when it comes to the learning phases, there's a few commonalities, I think, in most people's learning journeys, and there's a few common mistakes which they eventually solve. And, what it normally comes down to when you're taking the self-directed route, at least, is that you have so many resources available to you, more than there have ever been before. You might think that's a huge advantage, and once you learn to wield it, it is. But until then, it can be super overwhelming, knowing what path to take and knowing what specifically to learn. Moreover, if you're learning something like front-end development, which is quite a broad specialization, you might ask yourself questions like when to learn. Bojan is shaking his head no. What do you think, Bojan?
It's just my sad family story. You know, I have 3 siblings. They're all front-end developers, and sometimes when I'm lonely, I cry and ask myself, what did I do wrong? Why did they all become front-end developers?
What would you prefer they do?
I would prefer they were doing back-end like normal people.
Oh, come on.
Crazy.
Come on, Bojan. We're in the Bug Hunters Cafe. I think the triple shot of espresso has gone to your head, my friend. Front-end development is awesome.
Well, I have to ask you what excites you about front end? Like, what draws you to that?
I think it's what the user touches and experiences, right? And as much as, by the way, for what it's worth, I'm a full stack developer. For the early majority of my career in learning, I was doing ASP.NET and ASP.NET Web API and building services and things like that, interfacing with databases on the back end and authentication and stuff like that, and a little bit of like DevOps and scaling and stuff too. And for me, what really struck me is that, you know, if I want to build just a little app that my friends can use or a little app that solves a problem, I'm going to need an interface. And that kind of took me to the front end world. And maybe it's worth distinguishing as well that, you know, people become developers for different reasons. And I'm actually quite entrepreneurial and quite product focused. And I found that knowing front end development would enable me to, you know, build MVPs and deploy something that users can touch. With backend, there's, oh my God, so many exciting challenges, and I love it. But obviously, front-end development is what you can actually put in front of a user.
Right. Yeah. So I guess there's kind of the dichotomy between some people prefer spending more time with the computer and working difficult problems, and other people prefer communicating to the user and solving difficult problems. And
that is one part of it, but there are plenty of difficult technical problems and challenges with front-end development as well.
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm saying. Difficult problems show up on both, you know, but you know, it depends on, are you more interested in making the computer purr, or are you more interested in making the user happy, excited, you know, and using this, whatever it is you've built, where are you deriving your satisfaction? Because like for me, I get a weird satisfaction out of fine tuning the memory allocation. And
that's cool.
I love it. I do like working with the users as well, but not usually on websites. That usually drives me nuts. But I do some GUI, so I guess that's in a way some front end.
I think you make an excellent point, and it only goes to highlight how every developer is a little bit different. And if you find the thing that gets you excited, that's probably a good direction to go in, whatever that means to you.
So Reuven Lerner floated an idea when he was chatting with us a few weeks ago. And that was that they were seeing PyScript, which is Python running on WebAssembly, client side. So this is fully client side Python that is running basically at the same execution level, the same accesses that JavaScript does. And he predicts that we will see that take a huge chunk of the front end market in years to come. And there'll be a lot of movement towards Python. And as for my part, I think that's possible because of how many JavaScript developers are complaining about JavaScript. But I'm curious what your take is on that. Do you think we'll see more Python show up as that matures, or do you think JavaScript is the perennial?
When you say front end, are you referring to like websites? Or are you thinking about like desktop apps and mobile apps as well?
Well, in this case, mainly websites, because like there's already means of building, you know, native applications in Python, but we've never really seen it show up in browser client side in any meaningful way before now.
Sure. I can't say I'm familiar with the technology you're describing, but I am familiar with like how technology is adopted and how businesses make decisions. And I don't think anytime soon something is going to, as much as you might hope, I don't think anything is going to dethrone JavaScript. I mean, why do you think this language that was created, I think in 95, so 27 odd years ago, in 10 days, still exists and is prevalent today? It's because every year it develops a stronger and stronger foothold. And it's not only native to the browsers, but all of the development tools that go with it. And in terms of like businesses, like if they've built a team of, a programming language is not what makes a good programmer necessarily. Like a great programmer should be able to pick the right tool for the job, essentially. But there is like, context around programming languages. And if you hire developers with specialized knowledge in JavaScript runtimes, front-end frameworks, for example, and your whole code base is built in that technology, you would need an incredibly compelling reason to change, even if the technology is objectively better. And the best way I can explain this is that, look at front-end frameworks like React and Angular. If you're a front-end developer looking for a job, you'll find that something like 80% of the job ads in the West are for React or Angular, and it's like split down the middle. And you wonder like, well, where's Vue? Is Vue popular? Well, if you look on GitHub, Vue has more stars than React and Angular, which is a loose proxy for developers like it more. And there's a lot of compelling reasons to use Vue, and yet it only has a sliver of the job market. Why do you think that is?
Honestly, my best guess would be marketing.
It's because even if something's better, like unless there's a super compelling reason to change, Vue came a year later than React and Angular, just a year or two later. And despite that, Angular and React had already started to develop a foothold. And additionally, I think a lot of companies reasoned that like, if this is good enough for Google, if this is good enough for Meta or Facebook at the time, then this is good enough for us. And it gave them that confidence to invest in it. I can't speak for this particular Python technology, but there would have to be like a very significant movement for something like that to make its way onto the front end, in my opinion.
That's interesting. And it makes me wonder, working with humans, working with users is a very sort of flexible, somewhat unpredictable, lots of undefined and unexpected behavior when you're interacting with people. And, JavaScript is obviously very much similar. There's 19 different ways to do the same thing, and 18 of those probably is not going to be the best way to do it. But because you're dealing with, 20 plus years of JavaScript and all these different things have been created at different times, so you have different people writing from different time periods, different perspectives, code bases from different time periods, you have this interesting mix of different ways of solving the same problem, trying to interoperate together. And something I hadn't thought about until this conversation is the fact that sounds like communication.
I think it's evolution, isn't it? Because especially with something like JavaScript, which, if we were to go back to the beginning and design the perfect language for the web, it would probably look quite different from JavaScript, to be honest. And so over the years, developers build patterns and techniques almost on top of JavaScript, different ways of like doing scoping or working with dependencies, for example.
Dialects, as it were.
Dialects. Oh, that's a great word for it. And if you read code that I wrote in JavaScript 7 years ago and JavaScript I wrote today, it would look quite different, like in terms of the approach to, well, let's not forget that there was a new iteration of JavaScript as well, ES6, which introduced some more functional syntax and brevity to the language. And that unlocked new opportunities to write your code differently. Because something like arrow functions has a lexical scoping, you don't need to use the same old trickery you had to before to like manage the scope of you might do var that equals this. Like that's something that would have existed in the code a few years ago, but not today. And likewise, build tools have evolved. We now have things like Webpack and more lately Beats. This totally changes the way that we deal with dependencies. And yeah, to say it's a different dialect is totally accurate, I think, because you could look at that code, understand some of it, you're like, this sounds like this, this is familiar. Like I kind of get it, but you might not necessarily comprehend everything, especially if they're talking quickly.
Yeah, and then we wind up in confusion over what's a biscuit and what's a cookie and what's a chip and what's a crisp. And
I'm British. Don't get me started, mate.
Oh, absolutely. I watch the Great British Baking Show, and it always takes me a couple minutes to get my brain shifted over to that. But no, actually, I'm with you. Biscuit versus cookie makes a lot more sense to me because it's like there is a difference. There's times I want a biscuit, and there's times I want a cookie, and they are not the same thing.
That's 100%. Couldn't agree more.
Well, and this also makes me wonder, I've never heard anyone mention this before, but now I wonder, we have dialects, so do we have accents in code? Can you develop a coding accent?
It's an interesting one, but I think so. And you would, just the way people break out their white space, the way people name variables, like you can oftentimes look at two similar projects written by two separate developers or maybe two separate teams with a particular style guide, and you can certainly tell that there are differences there.
Mm-hmm. I'm sometimes able to use it because I work with a lot with legacy code, what I'm increasingly calling code archaeology, because you can almost see geographic strata in legacy code. And one of the giveaways is when the naming style has changed, because you can start seeing, okay, this was written here because they're using snake case, and this was written later on because they're using camel case, and then this person didn't know what to do, and so they have camel case with snakes, and you can't, so you start seeing patterns in history just in the style of the code itself.
And some people use like very short functions, some people use very long functions, other people break out their code into small files, other people have monolithic files. And there's no objective right or wrong answer. And that's where dialect comes in, I think. It's often colloquial, and like it depends on who you're hanging out with, where you learn to code, who your influences were, and just your preference and what feels right to you for whatever reason.
Well, this has been marvelous, and I feel like getting a refill of this cup of tea that I got, although I don't know why, because this doesn't feel like what I usually drink. It's one of those days. Maybe we should just go with you to see I would go with you to meet Paul and smell that kitchen, but I actually need to see if I can fix this plot hole still. I've been pondering it through this whole conversation, how we can basically got to restart continuity somehow. You got any ideas?
I'm actually more concerned about how I'm supposed to get back if I just appeared out of nowhere. Where do I go from here?
Well, Boyan, you got a thought on that?
Yeah, he just needs to clap his heels 3 times and say there's no place like JavaScript.
Well, on that bombshell, there's no place like JavaScript.
And he's gone. There we go. I'm going to go restart continuity. Thank you, as always, for a lovely chat. Boyan.
Bye.
Bug Hunters Cafe, this is Annie. Oh yes, we're open 24/7 at bughunters.cafe, and you can also find us on Twitter as Bug Hunters Cafe. Certainly. The music is provided by audionautics.com. We have a link on our website. I'm not sure what you mean. Jess usually answers the phone? I'm glad you told us. The continuity is a bit messed up today. I expect it's harmless, but weird things are happening in the meantime. I hope we'll get things fixed soon. You're welcome. Goodbye.
Excuse me, I seem to have a small submarine in my coffee.
I feel like that should seem abnormal.
I know the feeling.
Stand by. I think I can jumpstart continuity and fix the plot hole.
Here's your peppermint latte, sir.
Thank you.